Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about my progress so far with finding an outdoor setup for my Kyosho Lazer ZX6. Um, if I'm perfectly honest, I mean, the easy thing to do would be to just run my low C22.4, and I could be fast with that car pretty much anywhere on any track without having to make almost any setup change. It just happens to be a really good chassis straight out of the box. Um, but I always like a challenge, and I really do like this laser. It has a lot of really cool setup options that you don't get on some other cars, and it's just a great learning experience to go through it and experiment with it, and see what it does. So I think the last time I made a setup video for this car, I talked about going from the indoor season to the outdoor season, and I just kind of went back completely to the stock setup and made a few minor changes. Um, I found that I had to make even more changes. What was the problem that I was having was that initially I think I had the shocks more laid down. And so that helped the car corner a lot, which is great, but it also made the car very lazy. So if you're accelerating onto a straight and it's a bumpy surface and you find yourself having to correct the steering of the car as the car's getting knocked around on these bumps, then the having to do that plus the fact that the shocks are laid down and it's making the car lazy can actually throw the car into the pipe. It can very quickly get out of your control. Okay, so standing up the shocks helps considerably with that. It doesn't completely fix the problem, but it does help quite a lot with making the car a little bit more stable. Uh, you know, just going in a straight line. In addition to that, going to the 10-degree caster blocks also helps a lot because the stock setup tells you to use 7-degree caster blocks, which gives you a lot of initial corner entry steering, but it makes the car less stable on straightaways, on fast straightaways. And again, if you're on a bumpy surface and you find yourself having to correct the steering a little bit here and there just to keep the car tracking straight, if you have a low caster angle, it's going to make the car very sharp and very darty as you're correcting the steering, and it will very quickly get out of your control. And I was having that problem on the outdoor track that I'm running at right now. So I went from the 7-degree to the 10-degree caster blocks, and that helped to calm the car down a little bit. Um, as far as the shocks go, the rear shocks, I think I'm all the way on the outside hole presently for the rear shock tower. On the front shocks, on the middle hole on the tower, and the middle hole on the arms. And for the actual droop, if you will, I'm running, or for the shock ends, I'm running the medium shock ends. And what I do with this is I screw them in all the way, and then I unscrew them by 2 full turns. And that gives me about this much droop here for the front arms. And what else did I do here? I don't think I changed much in terms of... Yes, I did. Okay, I did change the front roll center a little bit. So even after making, this change with, standing the front shocks up a little bit more and going to the 10-degree caster blocks, I was finding that, even still the front was a little, I guess, lazy, if you will, and it was both a little bit lazy and also a little bit unpredictable at times. So getting onto that front stretch when the car would start to slide a little bit and I need to correct the steering, you steer one way and then you overcorrect the other way, and next thing you know, the car spins out. So I figured, okay, let me increase the front roll center to give the car a little bit of a push, so that on a lower grip surface, it's not going to respond quite so sharply in terms of cornering when I do make these steering corrections. So the stock setup, you have, I think it's a 1mm spacer under this inner ball stud here. So I took it out and moved it to the outer ball stud. So I dropped this ball stud and raised this one. That will raise the front roll center a bit. And on a high grip surface, that would make the car more responsive. But on a low grip surface, it would help to make the car push a little bit, which, again, on that front straight, I needed that stability. That was where I was having the most problem. For the rear, I needed to be able to put power down coming out of that corner onto the front straight without spinning out. And this was probably the biggest source of the challenge that I've had with developing a setup. So what I've done so far, let me make sure I got this right. I don't think I moved the hubs yet. Yeah, the hubs are still in their stock position, but I may play around with those later. I went to 1.7 millimeter, 2 by 1.7 millimeter rear pistons to get a little bit more damping, or less damping, if you will, lighter damping. And I think I'm on 32.5 weight rear oil right now. That helps a bit compared to running 2 by 1.6 pistons with 30 weight oil. So the slightly thicker oil, but the larger pistons makes the shock a bit more plush. Okay, so I guess a bit more like a Losi 22.4 shock setup, which was kind of what I was after. And what I also did was take the insert out of the rear inner hinge pin mount. Okay, so what that does is lay this mount down all the way, which gives you the most amount of rear anti-squat. And whether you should run more or less anti-squat on a bumpy surface is kind of it's kind of hard to say for sure, right? If you run more anti-squat, that allows the car to absorb more bumps as the arm is kind of compressing into the bumps as it's going over these bumps. So if you want to accelerate on a bumpy surface, you would tend to think that you want more anti-squat for that. But at the same time, I've seen some setup guides proclaim that you actually want to run less anti-squat on a bumpy surface. So, I tried it with the stock setup, and I tried it with removing that little spacer there between the chassis and this hinge pin mount, and I found the removal of that spacer to help a little bit, right? All of these little changes help a little bit. There's no one thing that's going to save your life. The other thing that I did was played with the rear inserts. So the rear inserts that you use for the stock setup in the manual, I believe, are the D inserts with the letter facing outwards. I went to the F inserts, and if you look closely at the inserts and where the holes are, basically as you go from A through F, at least for these particular inserts, it moves the hole progressively further and further to the outside. So the F insert with the letters facing out will give you the maximum amount of rear toe in. Okay, so that'll give me a little bit more straight line stability as I'm coming out of, corners and getting onto a straightaway and just trying to have, straight as an arrow acceleration on a bumpy surface. So a few things there with anti-squat and rear toe angle and shock angle, a little bit more stand-up, larger piston holes. That seems to help. So far, at least, this past weekend when I drove this car, it felt pretty good. I think I had to turn the exponential down a little bit on my steering to try to calm it down just that little bit more so that I can use minor inputs on the steering to help, straighten the car out on this bumpy surface without getting it completely out of control. Normally, I don't use any expo ever. I run it completely perfectly linear, but and I'd like to be able to do that. So I think what that means is I have to still play around with the setup a little bit more to really make the car stable. So I have a few more things that I'm thinking about. For example, changing or playing around with the front arm sweep a little bit. I talked about that in a separate video on the Techno SCT 410.3, what front arm sweep does. So I'd have to change the front inserts a little, or the rear inserts, either or, to sweep the arms forward a little bit. That will, cause the nose to lift up on power. So when you're going on a bumpy surface, the nose lifts up, and it just gives you a little bit more suspension travel, if you will, for the shocks to compress before bottoming out as you're going over a bumpy surface. Because, for a car this small, and this buggy is actually relatively light, it can get thrown around by bumps. So, you want to be able to accommodate that. If you run the oil too smooth, then the car's going to get very dumpy, and you won't have very much damping, and it screws up the handling. So eventually you got to play games with things like arm sweep and, toe in and stuff like that. So I think the next thing I'm going to try is sweeping the arms forward a little bit, seeing what that does. That may help. And then if that, if I still need a little bit more, I may try to change the front inserts to maybe increase the front track width a little bit. Because if you have, remember you have inserts that go into both the front and rear hinge pin mounts for both of the front and rear of the chassis. So if you use the inserts that push both the front and rear inner holes outwards, it'll increase the width of the car at that end of the chassis. So that may also help a little bit. So I'm going to play around with these inserts and see what it does for me. But so far, this setup works okay. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it's pretty good. And I was getting lap times that are in the, I guess, mid to high 13-second lap time for that particular track. That number doesn't mean anything to you, but to give you a frame of reference, with my four-wheel drive short course, my fastest lap was about a 13.3. Okay, so my four-wheel short course is actually faster than this buggy on that track. And typically I find that with four-wheel short course, I can push the chassis harder than I could with a four-wheel buggy because the truck is heavier and it has more mass, so it's not as affected as significantly by bumps. But I would expect a four-wheel drive buggy theoretically to be faster around that track. So I really want to get into the low 13s. If I can knock maybe a couple tenths of a second off, I think I can get there. That would probably be good. But I think in order to get there, I got to play with the inner hinge pin mounts a little bit. Let's see, is there anything else I want to mention here? I did try playing around with the rear sway bar. Okay, so this is the stock one. I did go up in tension by 1 unit. I think, 0.2 millimeters, I think. But actually made the car slide even more. So one of the other problems I was having is not only was the car getting thrown around by bumps, but for some reason coming out onto the front stretch, or the back stretch, if you will, on that track, just on corner exit, right around here, the car would start sliding as if it were on ice. And then as it travels along this stretch, then it goes from this section to a section that has a bit more loam, and then the car starts losing grip and it gets hard to control. So just this initial section here where I'm getting on power, I need the car, especially the rear, to be planted. And what was happening was initially the car was rolling too much because the shocks were laid down. And so, when you overcorrect in your steering to straighten the car out, it just gets out of control and you spin out or you hit the pipe. So, you stand the shocks up and then it's still doing it. Okay, well, maybe the car is still rolling too much. So let me try a stiffer rear sway bar. Okay, that makes it worse. So it's really not a rolling problem. Maybe it's an anti-squat problem and a toe-in problem. Okay, so let's put the stock sway bar back, play with anti-squat and toe-in. Okay, that helps a little bit. But there's still, I can still gain a little bit more with some other setup tweak. So maybe sweeping the arms forward, especially in the bumpier section of the track, that'll help. Sweeping the arms up, right? Because the inserts can not only go in and out, they can also go up and down. So if I sweep the arms up a little bit, that'll basically increase my caster a little bit further and help calm the car down on the front straight. So there's a few things that are left there to play around with. But anyway, I just want to share with you my thoughts so far on developing an outdoor setup for a bumpy outdoor track that's, I would say, it's not completely loamy anymore, but it's kind of, hard packed with some loam. Okay, it's a whole shot track, basically. So, yeah, that's it for now. And when I have some updates on the setup, I will, of course, make a new video. So, thanks for watching.